Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Here from our burlap palace, this is an Eager Beaver broadcast. And today, we're talking about shorts. These things right here, just to be specific, the pant. I am absolutely certain that so many of you, dear viewers, sit at your house often contemplating this great and wonderful question. Where do shorts come from? Well, now, my friends, you will have an answer, so come along with me on this study of military fashion and how it impacts the civilian world. I am going to gloss over a great deal of everything that is pre-shorts, quote there, just because we could talk on that subject for more than an hour-long lecture. However, I will bring up the ever-so-popular knickerbocker. The knickerbocker here was indeed considered fashion. Knickerbockers could also be called +2s and or +4s, and that would just be the distance from the knee at which it was cut. In this case, though, all of these pants would have been below the knee. They were used largely as athletic wear, but mostly considered for children and the overly adventurous for their time, mind you. When it comes to what we, in the modern world, consider to be shorts, we have to travel to the beautiful island vacation resort of Bermuda. And yes, I'm also speaking about that Bermuda. Our story begins in the year of 1914, just as the very first World War, or Great War, was coming to its beginning. In the year of 1914, Bermuda was still a British-held territory and a major shipping lane for the country as a whole, being a spot in between the Caribbean and the greater Atlantic. The British had in particular great reason to be there because this in 1914 became their North Atlantic headquarters for the Royal Navy. One particularly enterprising young man on that island, a native mind you, named Nathaniel Coxon, had a small tea shop on that island. In fact, it was the only tea shop on the entirety of the island. Being the only tea shop on a British territorial island, this spot, known as Coxon's Tea Shop, became extremely popular with members of the Royal Navy, members of Her Majesty's Royal Military, as well as very affluent civilians and businessmen on a whole. Although this picture here, to my left, is not the actual Coxon's Tea Room, it does serve as an example of what it did indeed look like back in 1914. Taking it a step further, this was an incredibly small building in the area, and it was frequented by so many people that it was often packed with people waiting outside to come in. Being a tea shop, it's already a hot beverage, further in a hot subtropical climate, and then with so many bodies inside and trying to get inside, this place became rather a sweltering heat trap. Several of Coxon's own employees came up to him complaining of just how heated it really was to work in his tea shop. Several of them even expressed that they were concerned that they would soon pass out due to perspiration. Talk about an OSHA violation and work safety issues, am I right? Being a small-time tea shop owner, Coxon did not inherently have the money to afford shipping in brand new uniforms for his workers with lighter, more breathing cloths such as linen. Coxon took the initiative and collected all of his employees' uniforms and took their pants to a local tailor, where he had all of the pant legs cut 3 inches above the knee. And from there, we recognize the very first pair of shorts in proper existence. That's just the historical consensus there. If you argue I'm wrong, I'm perfectly fine with that. There's plenty of room for debate here. So now you're wondering, how does this small tea shop in the middle of Bermuda influence fashion a world over? Well, you can thank the military for making it fashionable. Those guys are always responsible. Let's just be honest here, folks. Rear Admiral Mason Berridge is the one who is militarily given credit for spreading the short through the United States and Great Britain as a whole. We do not have on record a picture of Mr. Berridge, however, up here is a fairly decent example of the uniforms during the 1914s that were worn by Royal Military officers at that time, semi-pre shorts. You see now, Admiral Berridge happened to be a huge lover of Coxswain's tea room because it was the only tea room on the entirety of Bermuda. And all of you know that the British love a good 3 o'clock tea time. It is indisputable fact. While frequenting this particular tea shop, the Admiral happened to notice that the employees were all wearing shorts. And this idea, rather novel, stuck with him. He went ahead and carried this idea back over to the Royal Navy and had a semi-formal, informal discussion about possibly adopting this style for their own soldiers at the time. Admiral Berridge was wise to rather throw up the clever term Bermuda shorts in order to more easily sell this idea across the Atlantic as a whole for wider adaptation through Her Majesty's Royal Navy and Army. And surprisingly, it stuck. Strangely enough, the popularity of these shorts started when many tourists and visitors from the United States of America and the Great Britain Commonwealth as a whole started to visit Bermuda as a vacation hotspot. And what they saw at many of the very famous yacht clubs were several Royal Navy officers in Bermuda shorts, typically with high socks and dress shirts as a whole. Something about this uniform was deemed incredibly sleek and beautiful, and it really caught on with the civilian population as a whole. And soon, requests came for tailors to start cutting varieties of khaki pants and slacks into similar shorts. Mind you, they weren't seen as highly formal wear unless you were in the subtropics or on vacation. But this leads to a widespread acceptance of the Bermuda short across the world. It's really funny how one little yacht club has that much influence on the world. There's something to be said about dressing well, I suppose. Even as the First World War was already heating up, for some reason, these shorts made their way all the way into London, where it was decided by all the key manufacturers and decision makers that the Bermuda short was now the official subtropical uniform of Her Majesty's Royal Navy and military. So, I guess that's a cool fact. As just a bit of a funny side note, until the year of 2007, the Bermuda short, high socks, leather loafers, a dress shirt, a yacht club tie, and a blazer were considered the primary costume of Bermuda. So, that's kinda cool. From here, we're going to skip ahead a bit and talk about what really pushed the short into wider spread use across the Great British Commonwealth as a whole. And my friends, that starts with the legendary campaign within Gallipoli. The Allied invasion of Gallipoli began on April 25th of 1915, and to say that the initial landings didn't go well might be an understatement. For the landings at Anzac Cove, they actually went surprisingly well for the most part, until Ataturk and his reinforcements took the high ground and held it. And once Ataturk and the Turkish army as a whole had supremacy of the high ground, the battle at Gallipoli largely turns into a stalemate.
And here before you, you see an image of Anzac Cove, which is where the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps initially landed. Now, for those living here on Anzac Cove, life became exceptionally miserable exceptionally quick. For starters, it was incredibly hot. Further, enemy fire was constant. And finally, pestilence was abundant. From here, I'd like to offer you the words of Second Lieutenant Frank Boys, who best explains what it was like to land on Gallipoli and live there. We landed on Gallipoli in what we were wearing and continued to wear it day and night until the socks were the first garments to become unwearable, and they were cast out and we went barefoot in our boots. He continues, we discarded our tunics during the day as the weather became hotter, and working and living in earthen trenches, while sometimes sweating profusely, caused our pants and thick, pure woolen shirts to become even worse than filthy. In one of the greatest images ever captured of the Gallipoli campaign, we see here Australian soldiers moving into combat. What is particularly interesting to see here are the variety of modified shorts here in combat. And as funny or even sacrilegious as this may sound, this is an excellent example of military clothing that would soon be widely used by the civilian population. Australia's 8th Battalion signaller Tom Scahill is very well known for having coined the term "naked army" due to his poetry. However, I'd also like to offer you this quote from the Egyptian dailies. Not since the prehistoric Stone Age has such a naked army been seen in civilized warfare as the Australian Army Corps fighting on the Gallipoli Peninsula. These sun-tanned, stalwart, athletic colonials display an utter abhorrence for superfluous clothing. They are famous throughout Europe for their hard fighting, hard swearing, and nakedness even to a point of indecency. In marked contrast is the British regular, who never discards his clothing, no matter under what circumstances he may be fighting.
Now, this picture here to my right, I've had to rather YouTubeify, unfortunately, but it's an excellent example of what it meant to go out on what they used to call a bathing parade. Further, it just adds credence to the term the naked army. As you could tell from our previous quotations that were read off, so much of the Anzac spirit was more concerned with comfort and well-being over that of formality. So it came down to a point of do what you want, wear what you want, and continue to be of service to your Lord. Again, we're not giving a full spectrum discussion on what happened at Gallipoli in totality. If you are looking for that, there are far better channels to fully discuss the entirety of the campaign at Gallipoli. Please go and check them out. I would like to make note that by January 20th of 1916, Commonwealth forces left Gallipoli and the battle was essentially over as of that night. Now, let's go back to the overall story of how shorts are involved in all of this. The Bermuda short as well as makeshift shorts continued to see their way during the Palestine campaigns of the First World War. However, there's not much to note on these other than the fact that they did exist, they were there, and people wore them. And, as we all know, by November 11th of 1918, the First World War, the Great World War, was officially over with the signing of the armistice. Our next great development in the world of shorts happens to come in 1924. A man named Jacob Golomb founded a company known as Everlast because he had invented elastic waistbands within shorts. And this elastic waistband absolutely revolutionized the world of boxing. Prior to the invention of elastic waistbands, boxers wore very tight-fitting, custom-made leather underpant. Can you imagine the chafing? Really, how awful. And the moment that they could switch over to a nice, comfortable cotton elastic waistband, they took it over as a whole and it became their own. This in turn would slowly be adopted with many athletes as well as most militaries the world over for basic training and physical training. By the time that the Second World War began in Europe in 1939, the entire utilization of shorts became widespread once more and their production absolutely skyrocketed as far as the Commonwealth was concerned. Some really excellent examples of these shorts being used in the Second World War come from the likes of the Chindits and their actions in India and Bermuda as a whole, as well as then Malaysia for their several tropical environment combat areas. Furthering this point, we can see how Australia had great use for these both in North Africa during the North African campaign, as well as for their use in the likes of the Kokoda Trek and their own actions in Bermuda, New Britain, and Papua and New Guinea as a whole. Even after the Second World War, these shorts had no intention of leaving military service. This picture here of Australian forces in 1956 just shows that the only big difference is that the colors changed from khaki over to OD green, or jungle green as we'd call it, just a little south of the border. And rather in the spirit of the Anzacs at Gallipoli, we can see here that even in Vietnam, Australian forces and US forces would often cut their BDUs, that means battle dress uniform, they would cut them in order to be more comfortable and create their own shorts to just breathe in and have some sense of humanity left in such a hot tropical climate. And aside from the vacationing crowd of Bermuda in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, by the 1950s, several rather pre-existing beliefs that men should not wear shorts in public started to go away. In particular, you can thank this man here, Mr. Marlon Brando, for popularizing 1, the white t-shirt, and 2, Bermuda shorts. I'm not going to carry on too much more with the post-Second World War and post-Vietnam history of shorts, because at that point, shorts weren't going to go anywhere except mainstream. At this point, we see them everywhere. However, you can remember that it started in Bermuda. Certainly, I suppose that it must be true at this point that we can all agree that it seems all great fashion seems to start within the military as a whole. Or, in this case, it started in a tea shop, and then it just so happened to be adopted by the military. Isn't it crazy how that works? Funny world. Ladies and gentlemen, if you did enjoy today's discussion, please like and subscribe to this channel below. And if you don't like talking about shorts, don't subscribe. I'm not insulted. I'd like to thank all of you for your time again. It is so humbling to be here with all of you. Until next time, dear viewer, this is the Eager Beaver, signing off.